Welcome Exiles to my Chaos Inoculation Spectral Shield Throw Deadeye. Now, Spectral Shield Throw has had a rough start, receiving buffs consistently over its existence, being largely underpowered, and just received another buff this league, placing it solidly into a lower middle tier range, I would say, if you compare it to other skills in the game currently. Nowhere near overpowered, but also perfectly viable enough to do all the content. I decided with its new buffs, I'd be curious to see how well we could push this skill with some decent investment into gearing. Given that Spectral Shield Throw scales well with a high armor shield, I decided to mix in a Cerberus Limb, an unloved unique item which gives a good amount of spell damage and a unique modifier of giving our character 1 flat ES per 5 armor on our shield. With our chunky 3k shield, that equates to 600 flat ES. This, combined with Crown of Eyes, allows us to scale our Spectral Shield Throw with spell damage from the Cerberus Limb, and uniques like Mark of the Shaper as well. After this, we also opted to scale our damage via Fizz to Cold conversion from our passive tree, Gloves, and Watcher's Eye, focusing on acquiring stats such as Gain Fizz, Extra Cold, Cold Pen, and Crit. Now, speaking of Spectral Shield Throw damage, it is important to note that any nodes or affixes that specify X benefit with weapons will not apply to Spectral Shield Throw's damage, as throwing your shield into somebody's skull is not considered a viable weapon according to PoE's own terminology. Thus, powerful nodes such as Fangs of the Frost, Command of the Elements, lose a large portion of their benefit as they don't give our build any penetration. This has been a large part of Spectral Shield Throw's shortcomings, as a large portion of scaling for attack builds just won't apply to Spectral Shield Throw's damage because it's not considered a weapon. Beside the numbers buff to Spectral Shield Throw, it also received a power boost via Hydrosphere being added to the game. Hydrosphere is a placeable target we can hit with Spectral Shield Throw and chain off of it to hit enemies. This has multiple benefits. Benefit A is when Spectral Shield Throw hits the Hydrosphere, it shoots out the Shield Throw's shards as well as chaining to the boss. This allows us to hit the boss with both the Spectral Shield Throw and with the shards coming off of the Shield Throw when it hits the Hydrosphere. This and other interactions are nicely gone over in Nito's video. I'd highly recommend checking out and will be in the description below. Now, benefit B of Hydrosphere is basically auto-targeting. One of the worst parts of Shield Throw, at least for myself, has always been how easy it is to miss targets you are trying to hit simply by throwing the shield in the correct area, but off by a hair, and the shield will fly harmlessly past the boss without even making contact. With Hydrosphere, however, we have a nice big stationary target to throw at that will then auto-chain and target the boss correctly, which accounts for user error and misses that would have previously occurred. I found this most beneficial in boss fights like Maven, where I could simply place my Hydrosphere in the center during the last phase and chain off of it to hit Maven off-screen without even having to worry about chasing her all over Timbuktu as she teleports away frequently. Next, for our Ascendancy, we acquire damage with every point, getting Tailwind, obviously, as it's if that's even a choice for Deadeye these days, along with Ricochet for some additional chains and fun property of 30% chance to chain off of our terrain around us. Next, we grab Far Shot for a fat 60% more damage multiplier if we stand far enough away, which is why in many of these clips we're trying to stand very far away from our targets when we're attacking them. And lastly, we grab Focal Point for a fat 75% increased effect of our marks, taking Assassin's Mark to a whole new height. Sniper's Mark would also probably be a good option here as well, but I never tested it as I was too lazy, and I believe I needed the crit from Assassin's Mark. Now, with all the building blocks of this character spelled out before we go in game to break down the gem links, the gear, the passives, I have to preface it with the fact this character was fairly high investment to get to this result. There are places you can cut currency like the large cluster jewels, the boots, the gloves, even the Watcher's Eye, and still probably achieve defeating the endgame content, but ultimately will still require a fair amount of budget, like 20x, to at least feel decent. The reality is, unless you find some broken interaction, then mediocre skills like Shield Throw are just going to get you mediocre results. I don't believe we found anything particularly overpowered with our setup here. Decent, sure, but certainly not broken in any capacity. It was a fun build and an enjoyable skill to play around, all things considered. So still potentially worth playing if you want to spice up your life and beat the game with a skill you haven't dabbled with before. So let's hop in game to go through all the goods of this character. Welcome to the in-game overview. Now that we're in game, let's go over the gearing. So to start off with, Cerberus Limb, like we mentioned before, gives us a lot of ES, gives us some spell damage. Nice little unique, doesn't cost much, cheap item. The item we're building around is, of course, Shield Throw, so we really want a high armor shield. I snagged this for 8x, which I thought was a steal. I still think it's a steal, because it had +2 max all res, which was really cool, and it was already crafted with some really high defense, so I thought 8x was a steal for this. 3k armor shield, typically what you want to do is just get a Colossal Tower shield, quality it to 30, and then craft with dense fossils until you hit 2700, 2600, 2700, 2800, around there. Before then, you can go with a Magna Eclipsus, you'll get a decent amount of crit, and that shield has a decent amount of armor to start off with, but then eventually upgrading to a rare shield like this is something you want to do. After that, we have Crown of the Eyes. This is essentially so we can take advantage of spell damage from Cerberus Limb, take advantage of spell damage from Schmarka the Shaper, and then also having spell damage on the tree, we can grab different places for some nice damage scaling at 1.5 the rate of the spell damage, because this is applied to our attacks at 1.5% of the, or 1.5 of the value. Now, this base doesn't have to be a Shaper base. I simply decided, you know what, maybe someone in the future will want to do a Eternity Shroud build, and maybe I'll be able to sell it to that person, so I chanced a base that had Shaper influence already on it. A bunch of extra expenditure there, but not really necessary, I'd say. The ideal enchant's probably the additional shard projectiles, but getting enchants on Crown of Eyes is going to be real hard to deal with, and it's not the end-all be-all. You can play the build fine without this enchant. After that, we have our amulet. Over here, we simply get a Redeemer amulet. I go for around item level 84, so that way we can get tier 1 res, if you can RNG into it. And I simply threw Frigid Fossils at this until we hit Gain Fizz or Pen, and then I would set up a scenario where I'd have cold damage, cold res, and flat cold to attacks, and then do a non-cold to cold. And then there's like a 1 in 8 chance to hit tier 1 Pen, or like a 1 in 8 chance to hit tier 1 Gain Fizz's cold, something like that were the odds. Once I had those two mods on there, I did mess around with non-cold to cold, non-crit to crit, and shenanigans like that, switching around our suffixes until we got decent crit, and then fixed up a res with fire res, and then bench crafted on ES there. And then we anointed Tranquility, so that way when we're scaling our percent ES, we would also scale our damage, as Tranquility gives us damage or spell damage per ES. You can see it right here. Increases and reductions to maximum energy shield also apply to spell damage at 30% of their value. So say throughout the build we have 200% increased energy shield, it equates to giving us 70% spell damage, so that's a pretty big multiplier to our damage there. After that, we have Mark of the Shaper for our ring to give us spell damage again, and then we use a Crusader Elder Opal Ring. The reason being is Elder, so we can get the spell damage, but there's no mods we really care about from Elder except for maybe Crit Multi, and then we basically just Dense Fossil spam this until we hit decent percent ES with flat ES, and then OK suffixes. I hit Int, which gives us ES and projectile attack damage, and I was happy about that. And then Strength, I'm not sure I really needed in the end, but it was useful at the time for me to be able to use this shield. And then crafting on elemental damage with attacks for our prefix. You could also go for spell damage here as well if you bench crafted more and took more time to finesse your ring into perfection. For our body armor, this, although it is extremely good, is actually a lot cheaper than you might think. The bases for 6 white bases are really cheap nowadays. They basically follow the Split Beast crossed, and since Split Beasts are so flippin' common and people are farming them to such a high extent, you can get nice bases like this really cheaply. I got a Warlord base for 30C or something. I don't know, it was ridiculously cheap. A 6 white, Val Regalia, 30 quality, Warlord already on it for like 30C. It was a complete deal. I was like, hell yeah. And then we just awaken orbit with Hunter. You're just trying to get both these influences on there so you can put on attack crit and the minus mana cost later on. And then you just dense fossil spam until you get good ES. We RNG'd our way into triple T1. I would be happy with a T2, T2, T1 setup. Stuff like that will probably take you in the range of like 100 dense fossils, maybe less. It took us like probably around 70, 80 to hit triple T1. We got pretty lucky there. And then simply doing stuff like non-attack to attack. If you have full suffixes, there's no attack prefixes as far as I'm aware, and that's guaranteed to hit attack crit or the minus mana cost. And then you can basically force on the good suffixes you want there. So that's how you craft a chest piece like this. We did Maven Orb because we were like, you know what, we could either go for a plus 2% crit chance to attacks or for the stun immunity while using our attack skill. And we happened to hit the stun immunity, and then we forced on the tier 1 crit again with Harvest. Harvest is powerful. It gets your stuff done. The boots. These boots, the idea behind these boots were we were going to have 50% ailment avoidance. This is very expensive, and I never ended up getting this, but my plan was I was going to get 20% avoidance here, 50% on my boots, and then I was going to get 10% avoid ailment stuff, like 10% chance to avoid ignite with the implicit craft from Harvest, and I was just going to run a bunch of Harvest and get these implicit crafts. I did probably close to 50 of these crafts, and I hit 10% chance to avoid ignite, and 10% chance to avoid shock. I hit the 20% mana leech thing like 20 times, but for the life of me, I couldn't hit the avoid chance ailment stuff, so I never capped out my avoid ailment stuff, or my avoidance on that, so that was kind of a fail there. But we have enough gem slots, or jewel slots, to get basically avoidance on chill, freeze, shock, all of the above, and we never got there because I got tired of grinding harvest, and it was frankly just painful to continue to miss the avoid ailment implicit, because apparently there's a ton of implicits, and you know, RNG will be RNG. After our boots, we have our belt here. We just went for a Crusader Stygian Vise thanks to Harvest. This base was like 20C. Just chucked some dense fossils at it till we got some decent ES, got strength, got some res, and we were like, okay, cool, that's a decent belt, we'll roll with it. You can also go for Wed here instead of mana, but I never took the time to fix this belt up to perfect it for mana because I didn't want to take the risk of re-rolling the belt. I was like, it's good enough, I'll deal with it. After that, for our gloves, for the large portion of this character, I rolled with a Prim Sorrow gloves with the attack crit corruption on it. Costs me like 20C for a really high attack crit corruption. I was like, this is good enough, gets me strength, gets me cold res, gets me 50% conversion. That allows you to not need a Watcher's Eye here, or no, Watcher's Eye with Fizz conversion. Fizz conversion Watcher's Eye are pretty expensive, so if you have those gloves, you save money on both having a cheap pair of gloves and not spending a lot on Watcher's Eye, but you lose a little bit of damage because we get a lot of attack speed from these gloves. These gloves, what we do here is we Awaken Orbed the attack and cast speed affix from Elder with the attack and cast speed elevated Redeemer mod. I found some gloves, somebody selling the gloves with the elevated Redeemer mod for 1x, which I thought was kind of a steal, but no one's using the mod, so I was like, hey, easy money for us there, and it gives us a nice amount of attack speed there on the gloves. After that gearing, I think I've gone over all the gear pieces. Real quick here, I'm going to splice this into the video because I forgot to go over gem links. Kind of a big fail there, but we're here now, and we're looking at Divergent Spectral Throw. Divergent gives you extra attack speed, so this is nice for damage. After Spectral Throw, we went with a Inspiration Support, Vicious Proj, Awakened LE damage, and damage on full life, and Cold Pen. That is our damage setup. Looking at our aura setup, we have Enlighten, linked to Flesh and Stone to blind nearby enemies and make enemies deal less damage if they're outside our blinding aura. Then we have Precision for extra accuracy, which we need, and Hatred for that sweet, sweet damage. Also War Banner for some extra accuracy, some reservation. We had space left over, we fit it in. We also have Spellslinger here, a link to nothing. Apparently this is a thing I found out from a Mathel video, but apparently if you have it on left click here, it counts as a skill use and procs more Gale Force. So it basically just makes your uptime a lot better on Tailwind. If you have this here, it's procking. It keeps up some Tailwind Gale Force stacks, and then you attacking itself keeps up Galewind Force. So it's just a nice little thing if you have an extra link to throw in Spellslinger to keep up Tailwind Gale Force stacks. After that, we have Hydrosphere, linked to Awaken Unbound Ailments. I'm not sure if Hydrosphere ever did inflict decent chills or minimum chills or something, but the idea here was if Hydrosphere managed to chill an enemy, it would also give us a better shock than we would get from just hitting the enemies ourselves, I think. So that was the idea there of having our Awakened Unbound Ailments there. We have faster attacks linked to Shield Charge, linked to Fortify. This is so while we're mapping, we keep up Fortify. Feels good, extra defenses, nice mapping, movement skill. And then Second Wind Dash to supplement our movement whenever we come to a cliff. We couldn't get over it with Shield Charge, so we would dash over it. That's basically why we had that. Portal Gems, so that way we wouldn't have to manage Portal Scrolls as much. And then our last setup is Frost Bomb, Assassin's Mark, Arcanist Brand, and faster casting. This means whenever we get to a boss, we drop this on them. That would cast Assassin's Mark, it would cast Frost Bomb for exposure, and then it would be faster casting, so we would just be able to pop it off quicker and then get to dealing damage. I think that covers the gem links. Sorry I forgot this. Glad I at least caught it in the editing of the video to go over it. Back to the rest. Let's go over the flasks. Flasks, as always, I use an Eternal Mana Flask. I think probably the play here instead of Avoid Bleed, well, I don't know. I don't like dying to bleed, so I really like bleed immunity here. But one of the great options here would be the % crit chance, because our build was kind of lacking a little bit of crit. 80% crit chance on our Mana Flask would have probably been really big for damage, so that would be something to consider instead here, and you can benchcraft that if you unveil the mod from the Cinder Swallow from doing Katarina and Betrayal. After that, we have Taste of Hate. This gives us some Fizz taken as cold, which is some nice mitigation, along with some other gain Fizz as cold, which is more damage. Bottle Faith is really important for crit. It is at an all-time low in terms of price. The Bottle Faith price just keeps going down because of how many people are dropping Bottle Faiths. Everybody's running Cortex. Everybody's running the Feared. You get double the chances to drop Bottle Faiths. They're printing these things out, and these are at an all-time cheap price. Definitely pick these up. If you haven't used a Bottle Faith before, highly recommend it. After that, we have a Diamond Flask for Lucky Crit, because our crit, as I said before, is kind of lacking, so we need a Diamond Flask to help cap it up there. And then Quicksilver of Adrenaline, as always. You gotta go fast. Yeah, speed is number one when it comes to moving around. Now, let's look at the passive tree here. What are we doing? The hard part about Spectral Shield Throw, as I said before, is you can't scale anything that says with weapons. So Command of the Elements here, which says damage with weapons, penetrate. Things like this would be nice nodes. Fang's Frost would be a great node. Primeval Force would have been a great node. But all of this stuff where it has pen tagged into it, it says with a weapon, and Shield Throw just won't benefit from that, unfortunately. So there's a lot of nodes we can't benefit, and we have to scale most of our pen through clusters and things like Blanketed Snow. The cluster we went with was Blanketed Snow, Prismatic Heart, and Widespread Destruction. This is a very expensive cluster, and frankly, I would try to just get Blanketed Snow by itself, simply doing like Scour Alkene until you hit Blanketed Snow, or Frigid Fossil spam, or Chaos spam, and then just be happy with having it on a travel notable or something like that, and being okay with not going with Prismatic Heart. Most of my playthrough with this character, I was running just one cluster, and it was Blanketed Snow and Prismatic Heart and no Widespread Destruction. Eventually, through Harvest Crafting, I did keep prefixes, reforge item. You can basically keep doing that until you hit Widespread or Disoriented Display or one of the other notables on the suffix pool, and that's how you get it to a 3 notable. But before then, these jewels are very expensive. This is one of the last upgrades I make if you're going to go for min-maxing this build. For medium clusters, we went with Follow Through and Repeater for a lot of these nodes. This is just a lot of good projectile damage. With one of the nodes, I went for Pressure Points and Precise Retaliation because my crit is lacking a little bit, as I said, so I wanted to try to fix that up a little bit. We went with another Repeater and Follow Through here. And then last but not least, we went with Cold and Conduction. This allows us to shock enemies, and we scale non-damaging ailments with our boots with Elevated Redeemer mod. This means if we have a base 15% shock on an enemy, we get another 1.6 multiplier on that, and it ends up being closer to a 23-22% shock, basically. And then with Storm Rider, we can then get power charges. We already generate power charges with Assassin's Mark technically, but this is maybe a little bit more consistent power charge generation while you're mapping, so some extra damage there. It's more consistent crits. Okay, after that, we have a Lethal Pride here. This is simply to give us strength and then give us double damage. We just did Divines until we hit a couple double damage nodes, so we got double damage here and double damage here. So we got 2 double damage, and I guess we got Fizz. The other nodes we got were Melee Crit Multi, Warcry buff effect, and that stuff doesn't really help us, but we just really needed a couple double damage for it to be worth it to give us both strength, 10% double damage, and that's a pretty worthwhile jewel right there. You see, without it, we don't have enough strength for our shield there. After that, I guess we also have Fizz taking his fire. I didn't even notice we got that from Trick Shot. But after that, we have other jewels like Divide and Conquer. This is absolutely necessary for Shield Throw. It makes it so your Shield Throw can chain a bunch of times and shoot off additional projectiles. Very much recommended here if you're going to do a Shield Throw build. And Energy from Within. This is basically for more ES scaling. And then last jewel, definitely not the least jewel here, we have a Thread of Hope. That is a large Thread of Hope, which can hit a bunch of really good nodes. So we get Int here, we get Cold Pen, we get Cold Leech, we get Cold and Crit, we get Arcane Focus and Deep Wisdom. A lot of decent nodes here. Really would recommend a Thread of Hope like this. It works great for dot cold builds as well. So that goes over the tree pretty well here. I don't think I forgot anything specific or too important. Next, we should just look at our random jewels here. For jewels, we want to go for things like attack speed while holding a shield. Attack speed's hard to get with Spectral Shield Throw because of the nodes that have attack speed with weapon this or weapon that don't work. So really, one of the only good ways to scale your attack speed is with jewels like this, where they have attack speed while holding a shield. And then we also went for stats like Energy Shield, Res, and Spell Damage. We went for Global Fizz here, Res there. What else did we go for? Global Fizz, attack speed, Res. We were fixing a lot of our resistances here because I didn't have a lot of resistances on my gear per se, so a lot of our jewels were pretty heavy on the res side, but ultimately, I guess the suffixes we could have gone for crit multi too, so that's something to consider if you have better res than I do on your gear, which is maybe a little bit hard to do depending on where you put, where you get res from. Now, looking at the Pantheon, we had Brine King because we never got ailment immunity completely. We really wanted to be able to, if we get frozen, we don't want to get frozen again, and if we get stunned, we don't want to get stunned again. For the most part, the chest piece with the elevated Warlord mod made it so stun wasn't too much of an issue, but freeze would still be an issue, so we went with Brine King. Once you get to 100% ailment avoidance, you can probably settle for things like Soul of Solaris or Soul of Lunaris are both great options there. And then for our Pantheon, I did have Soul of Yugal just because I was using this when I was doing Uber at Zeri with the Sibyl's Lament, but previously, we most of the time had it on Cannot Be Blind, Cannot Be Maimed, and the Reduce Fizz Taken and Chance to Avoid Bleed. So that's the Pantheons I would recommend there. For Bandits, we helped Alira for the crit and the res. And I think that covers pretty much everything about this character. There will be a path of building below for you guys to look at. As I said before, we have a lot of investment in this character. It was pretty expensive to put together, but got some decent results. Ultimately, I'd say, Shield Throw is fun. If you have the currency, you want to screw around with a different skill, I'd say go for it. If you don't have a lot of currency, I'd say, it's probably going to be a bad time. Shield Throw really isn't a top tier skill. It's kind of just mid-range. I think it takes a decent amount to get to the point where it feels good. So that's the video. I hope you guys enjoy the build. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, guys. Have a good one.